os dinossauros, tanto carnívoros quanto herbívoros, se tornaram verdadeiros gigantes, e sua evolução foi o resultado de um longo caminho que começou nas florestas cheias de vida e experimentos. E agora imagine quantas ainda mais enigmas a história da Terra guarda e como cada época está ligada à anterior. 300 million years ago, our planet looked entirely different from today. Imagine a world where giant horsetails reaching the height of a 10-story building grew across the entire surface, creating primeval forests without the familiar trees we know today. These plants, which could grow up to 30 meters tall, were predecessors of modern ferns and conifers. Giant centipedes, with lengths exceeding that of a baseball bat, crawled through swamps and wet lowlands. They dominated the ecosystem, preying on small invertebrates and possibly even small vertebrates. Centipedes like Archospirostreptus gigas had a hard exoskeleton and could survive in conditions of high humidity, reaching up to 90%. This was an era when oxygen in the atmosphere was 35%, twice as much as today, allowing insects to reach enormous sizes. For instance, dragonflies had wingspans of up to 75 centimeters, comparable to the size of birds. But this was just a prelude to what was to come. This ecosystem laid the groundwork for the appearance of dinosaurs, but before that, Earth had to undergo numerous transformations, including the development of the first reptiles. What's even more astonishing, there were even amphibians the size of crocodiles that could survive both in water and on land. These creatures, such as Eriops, became predators that hunted fish and small amphibians using their sharp teeth and powerful jaws. But that's not all. There were also enormous marine reptiles like Plesiosaurus, which could reach lengths of up to 10 meters and hunted large fish-like creatures. Earth, teeming with life, was preparing for a new era, one where such giants as horsetails would no longer have a place. Soon, the climate began to change, and many of the species that dominated the planet started to disappear. Now imagine that in these conditions there were true predators capable of hunting large mammals that would appear later. Earth was on the verge of new discoveries and upheavals, and this was just the beginning of a story filled with unexpected twists. The land at that time resembled a true tropical fairy tale. Imagine vast trees reaching heights of 30 meters, with hard bark and broad leaves casting dense shade on the ground. The humidity hovered around 90%, and day after day, eternal summer reigned without any hint of seasons. Beneath these trees lay dense thickets of ferns, reaching up to 5 meters tall with leaves as large as small cars. What's even more astonishing, this climate was home to ancient insects like the Meganeura, with wingspans of 75 centimeters, larger than many modern birds. They soared through the air, hunting other insects which were abundant due to the richness of the vegetation. Now imagine that this ecosystem was not only lush but also dynamic. Rivers and streams flowed across the land, creating ideal living conditions. The water was clean and warm, with banks lined with small stones and vegetation where small, crocodile-like amphibians dwelled, slithering across the damp earth. But that's not all. In such conditions, mysterious creatures like early reptiles began to adapt to life on land, gradually evolving to hunt small animals with their sharp teeth and powerful jaws. Now picture a world teeming with life and diversity, where changes were already brewing that would shape the evolution of all beings. Among this tropical greenery and warmth, climate changes began to slowly erode the stability of the ecosystem, with new species gradually displacing the old. The secret lies in the fact that the oxygen content in the atmosphere was 35% higher than today, allowing insects and other creatures to grow to incredible sizes. Amidst all these upheavals, life on Earth was preparing for new challenges, and many species would soon face extinction. During that time, the oxygen level reached 35% due to the abundance of vegetation that actively produced oxygen through photosynthesis. Forests consisting of giant trees and ferns covered vast areas, reaching heights of 30 meters and more. These plants not only absorbed carbon dioxide but also released oxygen in enormous quantities, creating conditions for the survival of giant insects and other creatures that could not survive in modern conditions. For example, dragonflies with a wingspan of 75 centimeters hunted their prey using their sharp mandibles and incredible flight speed. But that's not the most astonishing part. Due to the high oxygen level, insects could grow to sizes that seem fantastical today. What do you think would have happened if creatures the size of a dog began to exist on Earth? That's exactly what happened. Some species of centipedes reached lengths of up to 1 meter, and beetles could weigh up to 1 kilogram, which was several times larger than their modern counterparts. However, this abundance of oxygen not only affected the size of organisms, but also their metabolic rates. Scientists suggest that many species could live significantly longer and had improved regenerative abilities. But how could all this change? With the deterioration of the climate and the disappearance of forests, the oxygen level began to decrease, affecting the sizes of organisms and their ability to survive. At the same time, the release of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere as a result of the decomposition of vegetation created a greenhouse effect, which also contributed to changes in the ecosystem. And the most intriguing part, it was during this time that the first ancestors of mammals began to appear, who would later dominate the planet. What other changes did Earth face with the arrival of new species? Lepidodendrons were not just plants, they were true giants of their time, reaching heights of 30 to 40 meters, with trunks sometimes reaching 2 meters in diameter. Imagine a forest where these ancient trees towered above everything else, like skyscrapers in a modern city. They not only dominated the ecosystem but also created unique conditions for the survival of other organisms. With their tough bark and extensive canopy, lepidodendrons provided shelter for numerous species. In their shade, ancient reptiles could find protection from the scorching sun. But the most astonishing fact, their leaves were covered in a waxy coating, allowing them to retain moisture in the humid conditions of the forests. These plants did not just grow, they actively participated in the carbon cycle, absorbing carbon dioxide and releasing oxygen into the atmosphere. In some places where lepidodendrons formed dense forests, the oxygen level reached 35%, which is twice as much as today. This incredible concentration of oxygen fostered the growth of giant insects, such as dragonflies with wingspans of up to 75 centimeters, which could freely glide among the tall trees. But how did they manage to survive in conditions where vegetation constantly changed? The answer lies in their ability to adapt to their environment. Lepidodendrons could disperse their spores over long distances, using wind as a natural parachute. These spores were the size of a tennis ball and possessed an extraordinary ability to germinate under various conditions. But what is even more fascinating, lepidodendrons played a crucial role in the formation of coal deposits that we use today. Their remains, accumulating at the bottom of ancient bogs, eventually transformed into coal, becoming the primary source of energy for humanity. And here's the most incredible part. During the process of transforming these plants into coal, substances were released that contributed to the formation of new ecosystems, thus spurring the development of other life forms on the planet. The trunks of ancient platanus trees were true architectural marvels, reaching heights of up to 30 meters and diameters of up to 1 meter. These forest giants lacked the usual bark found on modern trees. Instead, their trunks were covered in characteristic rhombic scars left by fallen leaves, creating a mysterious mosaic effect. Each scar was like a print, telling the story of how leaves fell from the branches and left their marks on the tree's surface. You can imagine a forest where every step reveals such trunks, adorned with unique patterns forming a whole artistic ensemble. But that's not all. The trunks of platanus trees were not only beautiful, but also incredibly strong, allowing them to withstand strong winds and even hurricanes. It's fascinating that their wood was rich in resins, making it resistant to decay and pests, indicating a well-developed survival mechanism that evolved over millions of years. What's even more astonishing? These plants could thrive in conditions of high humidity and heat, thanks to their powerful root systems that could reach depths of up to 2 meters, providing access to water even during the driest periods. Inside the trunks were special channels that helped transport nutrients and moisture, sustaining life in these giants. Platanus trees not only provided shade for smaller plants, but also served as shelter for numerous forms of life, including insects and small animals that found ideal habitats in their leaves. These plants were miniature ecosystems that supported life around them. And the most incredible thing? Some of them could live for more than 300 million years, and their remains are still found in fossil layers all over the world, revealing the secrets of their former glory. Giant calamites, reaching heights of up to 20 meters, were not just extraordinary plants, but true monsters of their time. They had stiff stems that could reach a thickness of 20 centimeters, resembling bamboo, but with a crucial difference. Calamites possessed a unique ability to photosynthesize using oxygen that was twice as abundant in the atmosphere as it is today. This allowed them to grow at an incredible speed, absorbing all available resources. How did they manage this? Their root systems were deeply embedded in rich coal soils, ensuring a steady supply of nutrients. Furthermore, their ability to vegetatively reproduce allowed them to quickly colonize new territories, much like conquering forests in competition for light and space. Now imagine a forest where each calamite is like a multi-story building, and their leaves create a dense green canopy filtering sunlight. But that's not all. Calamite is also served as a food source for a variety of creatures, including ancient insects and even the earliest ancestors of lizards. Their stems were covered in small thorns that protected against being eaten, but did not deter hungry herbivores. And when you think you've seen it all, here's another fascinating fact. Calamites could survive in flooded conditions, making them perfect for marshy areas. This meant that Earth's ecosystems at the time could adapt to the most unexpected conditions, all thanks to these giants. There were millions of them, forming vast forests that today might seem like fantasy. But the most astonishing discovery is that in their fossilized remains, researchers found traces of ancient fungi that may have played a significant role in their ecosystems, exchanging nutrients with the roots of calamites. These plant-fungus relationships could have created ideal living conditions that we still don't fully understand. Imagine forests where the height of the tree-like ferns, Ceronius, reached 25 meters, and their leaves grew to the size of a small car. These giants did not just adorn the primeval landscapes. Their complex root systems, consisting of numerous intertwined roots, firmly held the soil, preventing erosion and creating an ideal environment for other plants. What's fascinating is that these roots could grow to a depth of 3 meters, providing the ferns access to water-bearing layers and nutrients lacking in the upper soil layers. Moreover, the roots of Ceronius were covered in fungi that helped the plant absorb minerals. Truly, these were ecological champions. The leaves of these ferns, known as fronds, could reach 7 meters in length and 3 meters in width, casting dense shade on the ground where smaller plants could thrive, sheltered from the scorching sun. But that's not all. Imagine these fronds were not just green, but bright green with yellowish veins, giving them an exotic appearance. These leaf structures not only served for photosynthesis but also could capture moisture from the air, helping to maintain humidity in the underbrush. When rain fell, drops would trickle down from the fronds, creating miniature waterfalls that nourished the ecosystem below. What's even more astonishing? These ferns could reproduce by spores the size of a pea, which were dispersed in the air, settling on the ground, and giving rise to new generations. These spores could remain viable for many years, waiting for the right conditions to germinate. As a result, Ceronius dominated in the coal forests, creating dense thickets where giant insects and other organisms lived. And this is not all. In their vicinity, there were predatory amphibians that could reach 2 meters in length and hunted small animals, using their camouflage abilities among the dense vegetation. Thus, Ceronius not only shaped the landscape but also created complex food webs where every detail mattered. Interestingly, these ferns could survive in conditions with high levels of carbon dioxide, which was more than 300 parts per million, contributing to their growth. Chordates, the ancestors of modern conifers, were true giants of their time, reaching heights of up to 30 meters and forming forests that can be compared to today's tropical jungles. Imagine lush forests where each pine had a trunk diameter of up to 1 meter, and their dense canopies created impenetrable shade on the ground. These trees had tough bark that protected them from diseases and pests, and they survived in conditions where the carbon dioxide level reached 300 parts per million, twice as much as today. But that's not the most fascinating part. Chordates had a root system that could penetrate to a depth of 2 meters, allowing them to survive even in the driest conditions. What's most astonishing? These trees not only grew but also reproduced using seeds the size of peas, which were dispersed by wind over distances of up to 30 meters. Thus, they quickly colonized new territories, creating dense forests teeming with life. And here's where it gets really incredible. Chordates were not the only inhabitants of their forests. Alongside them lived giant insects, such as dragonflies with a wingspan of up to 75 centimeters, which allowed them to hunt small prey and even compete with small lizards. These insects could survive thanks to the high oxygen levels, which reached 35%. Breathing in such conditions was similar to using an oxygen mask. Chordates formed the basis of the ecosystem, creating complex food webs where every detail mattered. Interestingly, they could survive in changing climates, and some species were able to adapt to cold temperatures, spreading to northern territories. But what's even more shocking, these forests filled with chordates became homes to unique animal species that later became the ancestors of modern mammals and birds. Research shows that it was chordates that initiated the formation of true forests as we know them today, and their influence is still felt. It's remarkable that chordates went extinct only a few tens of millions of years ago, and the reason for their disappearance remains a mystery to scientists. But one thing is certain, the forests created by chordates forever changed the face of the planet and laid the foundations for future ecosystems. Giant plants that once inhabited the planet were true titans of their time. The height of some tree ferns reached 30 meters, and their trunks were as thick as a small car. How was this possible? The answer lies in the incredible oxygen content in the atmosphere, which was 35%, 8% more than today. This created ideal conditions for growth, as plants could extract 3 times more oxygen from the air than their modern counterparts. But that's not all. At that time, there were not as many pests that threaten plant life today, allowing plants to grow and develop without competition for resources. Imagine forests where each tree could reach the size of a 10-story building without any enemies. In such conditions, other remarkable organisms also emerged, such as insects that reached the size of modern birds. One of the largest dragonflies, known as Meganeura, had a wingspan of 80 centimeters, more than some modern pigeons. These giants could freely flutter among the tall trees, full of nutrients they obtained from the soil. Moreover, the unique ecosystem allowed them to reproduce indefinitely, as their offspring were not at risk of being eaten. But that's not the most astonishing part. Imagine how the rigid stems and wide leaves of these plants could survive in conditions of high humidity, reaching 90%. This created real tropical jungles where each plant could be 2 to 3 times larger than their modern equivalents. And the craziest part? Some of these giants could even survive in low-light conditions, using special photosynthesis mechanisms that allowed them to live even in dense thickets. Isn't that a natural wonder? Swampy forests were true jungles, where every detail played its role in the ecosystem. And imagine, here, eternal humidity reigned with a level up to 90%. This created ideal conditions for the growth of plants that reached heights of 30 meters and above. Many of them had hard bark and leaves the size of a palm, which could accumulate moisture. Giant ferns, some with trunks as thick as a human leg, crawled across the ground like green snakes, and their leaves, like enormous umbrellas, protected from too bright light. But this is not the most strange. Under these plants, mosses and lichens hid, which could cover the surface of the trunks, creating an illusion of a soft carpet. Imagine how, in such conditions, ancient reptiles could survive, hunting insects larger than modern birds. Dragonflies, with a wingspan of up to 75 centimeters, hovered in the air like real air predators, ready for attack. And here begins the truly bizarre. In these swamps, amphibians the size of crocodiles lived, leaving tracks in the mud like modern hippos. The water in such swamps was rich in organic matter, creating ideal conditions for decomposition. And in this world, life reigned, where every detail was interconnected in a complex network of interactions. What is even more shocking? These ecosystems were home to giant insects that could survive due to the high level of oxygen in the atmosphere, which reached 35%. This meant that breathing in these forests was like using an oxygen mask, and thus insects could reach sizes that we can only dream of today. In these conditions, plants adapted, developing sticky spores the size of a tennis ball to attract pollinators. What do you think happened to these amazing forests? They disappeared as the climate began to change, and in their place came completely different ecosystems, but we will discuss this later. Imagine millions of years ago when forests began to die, vast layers of plant material formed in their place. This process was not instantaneous. Dead plants sank into bogs where they were covered by tons of silt and sand, creating ideal conditions for the conversion of organic matter into coal. What's fascinating is that this process is called peat formation, and it requires time, sometimes up to 30,000 years, just to form 1 meter of peat. But what's even more astonishing is that this is not just decomposition, but a chemical process in which plants lose water and carbon is concentrated. How much carbon is there in a layer of coal? It can make up to 90% of the mass. And here's where it gets really incredible. Under conditions of low oxygen, pressure, and heat, this carbon turns into coal, the kind we know today. The coal seams we find today can reach thicknesses of up to 30 meters. But that's not all. In some places on Earth, such as West Virginia or the Donbass Basin, these deposits were formed under the influence of tectonic processes, adding even more layers to this story. But here's what's even more shocking. Sometimes coal seams can contain fossilized remains of ancient forests, preserving even their structure. For example, archaeologists sometimes find entire roots of ancient trees preserved in coal, which means we can get an idea of what these forests looked like. If you thought coal was just black rock, then here comes an amazing discovery. Coal can contain traces of ancient plants, such as ferns and conifers, which were the main inhabitants of these forests. This connection between plants and coal allows us to better understand how ecosystems have changed over time. And here's the most incredible part. These coal deposits we are currently mining were once part of a unique ecosystem where life thrived, and now they are the basis of our energy supply. Trees and plants of that time were submerged in swamps, where they underwent anaerobic decomposition, which lasted for millions of years. During this process, they were not exposed to oxygen, which prevented their decay. As a result, a peat mass formed which accumulated gradually at the bottom of the swamps, creating a unique layer. However, what is astonishing is that under the pressure and temperature conditions at great depths, this peat transformed into coal. Over millions of years, layers of coal were formed from the remains of vegetation, reaching thicknesses of several tens of meters. These coal seams, which we currently mine, are substantial deposits that formed from 30% of the oxygen contained in these ancient plants. It is interesting to note that during this period, there were no animals on Earth that could compete with the vegetation for resources, and as a result, giant trees up to 100 meters tall, comparable in size to modern skyscrapers, dominated the landscape. But that's not the most unusual thing. These trees were so dense and heavy that their roots could not reach more than 10 meters deep, limiting their size. Now imagine how this led to the formation of entire forests where each tree could weigh up to 100 tons. This process of coal formation became the basis for the naming of the geological period, as it was during this time that coal deposits reached their peak. But what is truly shocking is that in some places, coal seams can contain remains of ancient plants that have been preserved in perfect condition, allowing contemporary scientists to study ecosystems that existed millions of years ago. Among these findings, there are even fossilized traces left by giant insects, which were also part of this extraordinary ecosystem. And the most amazing thing, in some places, coal seams intersect with other geological formations, creating complex layers that tell the story of how the climate and landscape changed over millions of years. These dragonflies, known as Meganeuridae, were true giants of their time. The wingspan of some reached 70 centimeters, which is larger than that of most modern birds. Imagine them soaring through warm, humid forests, hunting small insects that couldn't escape their keen eyes. Their wings were not just enormous, they were covered with a complex network of veins, allowing them to maneuver with remarkable agility despite their size. This power was due to the high level of oxygen in the atmosphere, 35% compared to the 21% we have today. This allowed Meganeuridae to develop extraordinary speed, making them invincible predators in their ecosystems. But what's even more astonishing, their eyes were as large as saucers, providing an incredible field of vision and the ability to detect even the smallest movements. What's even more shocking, these dragonflies could survive in conditions where modern insects would struggle. They hunted in dense thickets where every moment could be crucial. Remarkably, their respiratory system was adapted to high oxygen levels. The lungs of Meganeuridae were perfect for extracting the maximum amount of oxygen from the atmosphere, allowing them to survive in conditions where other creatures had to rely on more primitive breathing mechanisms. And here's where it gets really incredible. Their ancestors might have been polyphyletic species that evolved over millions of years, adapting to constantly changing environmental conditions. When the cycle of life changed, Meganeuridae remained at the top of the food chain, dominating other insects. But how did they disappear? The answer is shocking. Climate change and a decrease in oxygen levels made their existence impossible. These giants, whose size would inspire both awe and fear in modern people, could not adapt to the new conditions. Their remains, found in fossil layers, testify to how diverse life was during the time when such extraordinary creatures dominated the Earth. Now imagine if such dragonflies still existed today. Their majesty and power could transform entire ecosystems. Imagine a millipede the size of a small car. This is the Arthropleura, the largest terrestrial arthropod in history, capable of reaching lengths of up to 2.5 meters. These giants, which crawled through ancient forests, had up to 30 pairs of legs, allowing them to move with remarkable agility. Their bodies were covered in a hard, chitinous shell that protected them from predators and helped them survive in high humidity conditions. Did you know that an Arthropleura could weigh up to 150 kilograms? Picture it, slogging through swamps, leaving deep tracks in the soft earth. These millipedes hunted small invertebrates and possibly even small vertebrates, using their sharp jaws to catch their prey. But the fascinating facts don't stop there. How could such giants survive in conditions where the oxygen level exceeded 35%? The answer lies in their respiratory system. The Arthropleura used tracheae that ran through their entire body, allowing them to efficiently absorb oxygen from the air. Now imagine at that time there were no mammals on Earth. Each of these creatures dominated its niche, and their sizes emphasize the incredible diversity of the ecosystem. But what's even more astonishing, these millipedes reproduced by laying eggs in soft soil, and their offspring were likely just as impressive as the adult specimens. What do you think happened to the Arthropleura? Pure competition with other species and climate change led to their extinction. But what really blows the mind is that recent findings show they could have survived in conditions that today seem impossible for such giants. Now imagine what our planet would look like if they still existed. Oxygen was twice as abundant as it is now, opening up incredible possibilities for life's development. Imagine how insects that breathe this air could reach sizes we can only dream of. For instance, dragonflies with a wingspan of 75 centimeters were not a fantasy but a reality of that time. This meant that insects could survive and hunt their prey much more effectively than their modern counterparts. But what made this oxygen so important? The high level of oxygen allowed insects to develop a unique respiratory system. Imagine their tracheae, through which oxygen entered, were so advanced that they could deliver oxygen to every cell in their body. This gave them an incredible advantage in the struggle for survival. And now, the most incredible part. Some of these creatures could weigh up to 100 grams. Have you ever thought about seeing a fly the size of a pigeon? In such an atmosphere, even small organisms could evolve into real giants. This not only amazed but also created new ecosystems. For example, insects that could fly at such sizes became the main pollinators for plants that also grew to incredible heights, with trunks like modern sequoias reaching 30 meters in height. But let's not forget that such evolution also brought many dangers. Competition for resources became increasingly intense, and what's even more shocking, these giant insects like the Meganeura could hunt small vertebrates using their sharp spines and powerful jaws. They were true predators of their time. What do you think could have happened if they had remained on Earth until today? Imagine giant cockroaches the size of a rat crawling through the dense forests of the Carboniferous period. Archimelocris, that's what this extraordinary species was called, could reach a length of up to 30 centimeters. These were not just insects, but true monsters of their time, with powerful jaws capable of crushing anything. But that's not all. Their wings had a span of up to 50 centimeters, allowing them to soar above the forest floor, hunting their prey. What do you think they could do with prey the size of small rodents? These cockroaches not only survived but dominated their ecosystems. Their rough exoskeletons were covered in sharp spines that protected them from predators. And now imagine their diet. It wasn't just vegetation, but also other insects and even small vertebrates, making them true predators. Do you know what could have happened if they continued to evolve? Their size and abilities would have been just the beginning. These giants could have colonized new territories, and their impact on the ecosystem would have been immense. But what's truly fascinating is that in conditions with a high oxygen level, which was 35% at the time, such sizes were not just possible, but necessary for survival. This meant that their respiratory organs were adapted to function in conditions of high oxygen content. Scientific research shows that in those times, even small insects could grow to unimaginable sizes. For example, some dragonflies had wingspans of over a meter. But how could these cockroaches compete with such giants? Their cunning lay in their ability to hide in the foliage and under roots, waiting for the right moment to attack. Archimelocris was a master of camouflage, and its dark coloration helped it blend into its surroundings. Now imagine if such a cockroach ended up in your house. Its size would be comparable to a small cat. Their appearance in the modern world would cause a real uproar. And what's even more shocking, these cockroaches could reproduce so quickly that their population could increase by several hundred in just one season. In conditions where food was abundant, they could create colonies that would take over new territories. Pulmonoscorpii, known as one of the largest marine arthropods of their time, could reach lengths of up to 70 centimeters. These creatures were not only impressive in size, but also caused genuine terror in their enemies. They had powerful claws capable of crushing prey and a sharp, venomous tail used for both defense and hunting. What's most astonishing? These scorpions inhabited freshwater environments, which was unusual for their contemporaries who preferred marine habitats. It's no surprise that Pulmonoscorpii became dominant predators in their ecosystems, hunting fish and other invertebrates. Their sophisticated respiratory system allowed them to survive both in water and on land, giving them adaptive advantages. But that's not all. They had a hard exoskeleton for protection against predators and soft segments for movement. Imagine them crawling along the bottom of ancient rivers and swamps, leaving behind traces that scientists still study today. What do you think happened when Pulmonoscorpii encountered other giant predators of their time? Their ecosystem was filled with competition, and every day was a struggle for survival. Moreover, their remains are sometimes found in layers dating back over 300 million years, indicating that they existed much longer than many other species. Now consider this. Their closest relatives are modern spiders and scorpions, which, although smaller, can still instill fear. And here's another interesting fact. Pulmonoscorpii could hunt their own kind, using their deliberate movements and excellent environmental awareness. These creatures did not just survive, they adapted and dominated their ecosystems, leaving behind traces that tell stories of life in conditions we can barely imagine. Picture this. Their length could rival that of some modern dogs. Pulmonoscorpii not only survived but also thrived, and their story continues to captivate scientists to this day. While on Earth, centipedes and giant insects ruled, the vertebrate predators remained surprisingly small. Imagine a world where the largest predators were amphibians the size of a cat, not giant lizards. At this time, on land, these small predators dominated, unable to compete with the size of their arthropod neighbors. Giant dragonflies with wingspans of up to 75 centimeters and centipedes longer than a baseball bat were the monsters of their time, but the absence of large vertebrate predators allowed these creatures to thrive. But what is even more astonishing? These centipedes could grow up to 30 centimeters long, and some species even reached the size of modern dogs. But why was this the case? It all comes down to oxygen. Its level was 35% compared to the current 21%. This meant that large insects could get enough oxygen to maintain their enormous sizes. But it wasn't that simple. The evolution of vertebrates in this period was just beginning, and they hadn't yet reached sizes that could compete with the giant invertebrates. And here's where it gets really crazy. Imagine that there were sharks on Earth, but not the ones we know today, rather their ancestors that hadn't yet ventured onto land. These ancient creatures lived in waters where their sizes did not exceed a meter, posing no threat to centipedes and dragonflies. No predators could control the sizes of these invertebrates. On land, primitive amphibians, despite their sizes, were still too small to hunt such giants. Moreover, their fragile bones did not allow them to develop such sizes as modern reptiles. And the most crazy thing? Nature provided these creatures with an ideal ecosystem where they could grow and adapt without threat from large predators. The secret lay in the fact that the ecosystem was entirely focused on vegetation, which provided enough food for all arthropods, allowing them not only to survive, but also to evolve into true giants. Frogs the size of crocodiles splashed through the swamps, but they couldn't compete with such monsters as flying insects and centipedes. And just as this was happening, the first reptiles appeared on land. These creatures, though small, began to carve out their niche, but they were still far from becoming true giants. The question is, how will they change the balance in the ecosystem when they become large enough to challenge these giants? Did they have a chance? This would depend on many factors, including climate and resource availability. And in this world full of wonders, there still remains a mystery. What will happen when predators become large enough to challenge the reign of these colossi? The first glance at the amphibians of that time reveals an astonishing variety of life forms, among which the aeropods and Difficavlices stand out. The aeropods, reaching up to 2 meters in length, had long, muscular limbs that allowed them to move effectively both on land and in water. These creatures hunted invertebrates, using their sharp teeth to catch their prey. Imagine them swimming in shallow waters where every muscular part of their body was aimed at quick reaction, enabling them to catch any prey. The Difficavlices, with their characteristic body shape, could reach up to 3 meters in length, had powerful jaws and a long tail that served as a propeller in the waters teeming with life. These amphibians could use their tails for quick maneuvers, allowing them to avoid predators and hunt fish the size of small dogs. What is even more astonishing, they had strong hind limbs that allowed them not only to swim, but also to jump onto land with incredible height, almost a meter above the ground. This was a time when the diversity of life was rapidly evolving, and each new discovery opened up new horizons. The aeropods and Difficavlices not only evolved, but also adapted to various conditions, making them true masters of survival. Their ancestors had already begun to conquer the land, and when they crawled along the shores, there were reptiles the size of small cars in the air. These amphibians became a crucial link in the chain of evolution. How did they cope with climate change and the surrounding environment? In this world where everything changed at lightning speed, these creatures took the first steps towards conquering the land. Their skin, covered with a hard shell, not only protected them from predators but also allowed them to retain moisture in conditions of high temperature. In fact, such adaptations led to the further development of more complex vertebrates. But what happened to them when the climate began to change? Eogurinus, this remarkable amphibian, could grow up to 4.5 meters long, was a true monster of its time. Imagine a creature that could rival modern crocodiles in size, yet possessed the distinctive features of amphibians. Its long body and powerful limbs allowed it to hunt in water and move on land. But that's not the most fascinating part. Eogurinus had a unique jaw that could open up to 80 centimeters. Do you know what that means? It could swallow prey the size of a small dinosaur. This giant was not just a predator, but also a part of the ecosystem where other unusual creatures lived. In its habitat, you could find fish the size of a minivan and insects 3 times larger than modern ones. Now imagine Eogurinus hunting these giants, using its sharp teeth and powerful jaws. By the way, its teeth had a unique structure. They were pointed and could tear flesh, making it a true king of the waterways. But that's not all. Eogurinus had exceptional adaptability. Its skin, covered with a hard shell, protected it from potential threats and helped it retain moisture in conditions where other amphibians could quickly dry out. Can you picture it crawling along the banks of ancient rivers, leaving deep tracks in the mud? These tracks could be up to 30 centimeters deep. What do you think caused its extinction? It's truly shocking. Climate change, which led to a decrease in river and lake water levels, became critical. Animals like Eogurinus couldn't adapt to the new conditions, and their population rapidly declined. But the most amazing thing is that some of its descendants, although smaller, still survive today in the form of modern amphibians. Imagine Eogurinus living in a world where eternal summer reigned for millions of years, and its descendants may now hide in the most unexpected corners of the planet. Studying its fossil remains allows scientists to understand how these creatures interacted with their environment and how evolution led to the appearance of modern reptiles and amphibians. Did you know that Irgurinus remains have been found in places like the United States and Europe? This indicates that its habitat covered vast territories. But what's really intriguing, Irgurinus might have been just one of many forms of life that dominated the Earth before climate and ecosystems underwent significant changes. Amphibians of that time were not just inhabitants of land, their lives were inseparably linked to bodies of water, and here's why. These creatures needed water not only for drinking, but also for reproduction. Their eggs could not survive in dry conditions, so they sought places where humidity was high. Imagine, swamps, rivers, and lakes teeming with life and diversity served as the ideal habitat for these animals. They laid their eggs in shallow water where the temperature was stable and predators were fewer. Isn't it amazing? These eggs were covered with a thin shell that protected them from drying out but allowed water and oxygen to penetrate inside. It was an evolutionary marvel. And that's where things get really fascinating. Not only were there young amphibians in the water, but also adult ones that hunted invertebrates like insects and small crustaceans. Their sizes varied from a few centimeters to meter-long giants that were truly awe-inspiring. Scientists have calculated that some species could reach lengths of up to 2 meters. How did they survive in such conditions? The answer lies in their ability to adapt to various ecosystems, allowing them to find food even in the harshest environments. But that's not all. Amphibians possessed unique regenerative abilities, enabling them to regrow lost limbs and other body parts. This was not only incredible but also crucial for survival. If you thought that was amazing, wait until you hear this. Since amphibians could live both in water and on land, they became the first creatures to start colonizing new ecosystems. However, their connection to water bodies remained strong. When water levels dropped, many species faced the threat of extinction. Climatic changes also played a role. With increasing temperatures and changes in water levels, some amphibians were forced to migrate to new habitats. This meant they had to adapt to new conditions, leading to the emergence of new species. Moreover, during this period, there was intense reproduction, and some populations could increase several times in a short period. However, despite their adaptability, many species could not survive the sudden ecological changes. And here's what's even more astonishing. Some amphibians developed complex social structures, forming groups for hunting and protection. These groups could consist of up to 100 individuals, allowing them to effectively defend against predators. Thus, they became not just part of the ecosystem, but also an important element of it. And the craziest part? Evidence of their existence can be found in fossils that have preserved traces of their lives and behaviors, revealing the mysteries of the distant past. Initially, reptiles managed to occupy the vacant space as the climate began to change, creating new living conditions on Earth. Their skin, covered in hard scales, allowed them to survive in drier conditions than their amphibian ancestors, which depended on water for reproduction. This meant that reptiles could spread over larger territories and conquer land where amphibians felt vulnerable. What is most remarkable? Reptiles were able to lay eggs on land, which was a breakthrough. Unlike amphibians, which needed water for reproduction, reptiles could conquer new ecosystems without worrying about the proximity of water bodies. Their eggs were more numerous and had a harder shell, protecting developing embryos from external threats. This gave them a significant advantage in the struggle for survival. Now imagine how diverse they were, from small lizards to giant ancestors of crocodiles that could reach lengths of up to 7 meters. While amphibians remained dependent on a moist environment, reptiles adapted to many new habitats and developed unique hunting and defense strategies. For example, some became predators, using their sharp teeth and powerful jaws to capture prey. But that's not the most unusual thing. Some reptiles evolved clever camouflage techniques to avoid predators. One of the most famous groups of reptiles, the Ediacaran fauna, could have a color palette similar to their surroundings, making them almost invisible. And here's where it gets really strange. These reptiles adapted to various climatic conditions from tropics to deserts. What gave them such flexibility? The answer lies in their ability to regulate temperature. They could retain heat or cool down depending on external conditions, which was key to their survival. Scientific research shows that some reptiles could reach lengths of up to 12 meters, using their size to dominate ecosystems. And what is even more shocking, these giants hunted their competitors using strength and speed that were unavailable to amphibians. They became not just a part of the ecosystem, but its main predators, with whom all other inhabitants had to reckon. Gillinomus, the size of a lizard, was a true wonder of nature in its time. Its length could reach up to 30 centimeters, and it possessed remarkable adaptations that allowed it to survive in conditions where most animals could not. This reptile had a slender but sturdy body covered in hard scales that served as protection from predators. Imagine a small lizard capable of quickly moving across the ground and even climbing trees, making it one of the most agile creatures in its ecosystems. And the most astonishing fact, Gillinomuses hunted insects and small invertebrates using their sharp teeth and quick reflexes, allowing them to catch prey in mid-air. Did you know that these reptiles had highly developed lungs, enabling them to breathe more efficiently? This meant they could occupy niches inaccessible to many other animals of the time. But that's not all. Their eyes were positioned on the sides of their heads, providing a wide field of vision and allowing them to react instantly to threats. Now consider that despite their small size, Gillinomuses could survive in a complex and competitive environment dominated by much larger predators. They used their speed and agility to avoid confrontations with larger creatures. Their reproductive process was particularly interesting. Gillinomuses laid eggs in protected places to safeguard their offspring from predators, indicating a high level of instinctual behavior. And what's even more astonishing, these reptiles were predecessors of larger dinosaurs, making them key players in the evolution of vertebrates. Gillinomuses inhabited dense forests where every moment could be crucial. In these forests filled with predators, they not only survived but also thrived, finding shelter in the foliage and using their surroundings for hunting. It's remarkable that their way of life was so adaptable that they could exist in the most varied climatic conditions. Research shows that Gillinomuses could survive even during periods of rapid climate change when many other species went extinct. In the end, it was such resilient creatures as Gillinomus that formed the basis for the more complex ecosystems we know today. But what's truly intriguing is that despite all their abilities, they disappeared, leaving behind only traces in the fossil record. What do you think could have caused their extinction? The appearance of the amniotic egg was a true revolution in the world of reptiles, opening doors to the conquest of land. This egg, protected by a hard shell, allowed embryos to develop outside of water, meaning that reptiles could now conquer new territories that were previously dependent on water bodies. Imagine this. Thanks to this egg, the size of a rugby ball, reptiles could cross deserts and forests where they could not previously survive. But the most fascinating part is that the egg not only provided protection, but also contained reserves of nutrients, allowing for the development of more complex organisms. Did you know that on average, one amniotic egg can contain up to 35 grams of protein? This is like a full meal for a growing embryo. Inside the egg, there is amniotic fluid that acts as a shock absorber, protecting the fetus from mechanical damage. But that's not the most bizarre part. With the appearance of the amniotic egg, reptiles began to develop numerous adaptations that allowed them to survive in the harshest conditions. For example, some species started to lay eggs in sandy nests, providing additional protection from predators. And here's where it gets truly extraordinary. Some reptiles became so successful that their descendants, such as dinosaurs, began to dominate the planet. Imagine a Tyrannosaurus rex, the size of a small car, hunting its prey. But this is not just about size. Reptiles also gained the ability to conquer new niches thanks to the development of their respiratory system, allowing them to breathe more efficiently. And what's even more shocking, these eggs not only provided protection but could also change under the influence of the surrounding environment, allowing reptiles to evolve faster. For example, in hot conditions, eggs became more resistant to avoid overheating. In the end, the amniotic egg became not just a means of reproduction, but a true key to survival and flourishing. And did you know how many different types of reptiles appeared as a result? Over 100,000. This means that each new adaptation could lead to the emergence of completely new forms of life. Imagine a creature up to 3 meters long with a sail on its back, like modern lizards. This is the Pelycosaurus, one of the earliest ancestors of mammals, inhabiting conditions of eternal summer. Its sail, composed of sharp spines, could reach up to 30 centimeters, giving it a menacing appearance and likely used for thermoregulation. Pelycosaurs could warm up in the sun or cool down in the shade. Hard to believe, but these creatures were not lizards. They were a separate class of reptiles that dominated the land. They had powerful jaws capable of tearing flesh, allowing them to hunt small animals and even other reptiles. What's even more shocking? Some pelycosaurs had teeth resembling needles, perfectly suited for catching slippery prey. And this isn't just speculation. Their jaws contain traces of teeth indicating their hunting prowess. These reptiles thrived in conditions of high humidity and abundant vegetation, creating ideal conditions for reproduction and growth. Pelycosaurs could not only hunt, but also compete with other predators of their time. They occupied all possible niches, from small predators to large, formidable forms, controlling ecosystems like modern carnivorous mammals. But that's not all. Their descendants, who became the ancestors of mammals, evolved in conditions where completely different climatic conditions emerged. While their close relatives vanished, pelycosaurs adapted, preserving their main features. And how did they manage to survive in changing climates? The secret lies in their metabolic ability, which allowed them not only to survive, but also to thrive in new conditions. Mammals descended from pelycosaurs adapted to the most unexpected living conditions. For instance, many of them became warm-blooded, giving them an advantage in the struggle for survival. Remarkably, some pelycosaurs could reproduce every 6 months, allowing them to quickly increase their population. And the most incredible thing? There are data suggesting that pelycosaurs could live up to 30 years, which was a real achievement for reptiles of that time. Dimethrodon, one of the most famous predators of its time, possessed unique features that set it apart from other reptiles. Its length could reach up to 4 meters, and its impressive spines on its back could grow up to 50 centimeters. But here's the most astonishing fact. Dimethrodon was not a dinosaur. It lived before them and became one of the first large terrestrial predators that dominated the Earth. These creatures hunted a variety of prey, including herbivores the size of humans, and some of the earliest mammals that were just beginning to develop. Soon after their appearance, Dimetrodons became not only hunters, but also an integral part of the ecosystem, creating a balance between predators and herbivores. Imagine a world where you had to fight for your life every day against such giants. Dimethrodon had powerful jaws and sharp teeth that allowed it to tear the flesh of its prey. It's interesting to note that its jaws could open almost 120 degrees, making it one of the most terrifying predators of its time. And now comes the truly bizarre. Its lifestyle was directly linked to the temperature of its surroundings. Dimethrodons were ectotherms, meaning they depended on external temperature to maintain their metabolism. This allowed them to be active hunters in warmer conditions, but in cold times they could fall into a state of semi-hibernation. Despite their size and strength, Dimethrodons managed to survive in changing climates that altered their habitat. How did they cope with such challenges? The secret lay in their ability to migrate to warmer regions and adapt to new conditions. This allowed them to occupy various ecological niches and avoid competition with other predators. But what's even more shocking, Dimetrodon did not leave behind many fossil remains, but those that were found indicate that it could survive in conditions where many other species went extinct. Its remains, discovered in various places, show that it could inhabit different types of ecosystems, from wet swamps to dry land. These facts highlight just how adaptable and resilient Dimetrodon was. Ultimately, Dimetrodon became one of the first large vertebrates to conquer the land, paving the way for future predators. But that's not all. Its descendants gradually evolved into more advanced reptiles that would later dominate the planet. And here's the most intriguing part. Some of them eventually became the ancestors of modern mammals, including us. Climate on the planet underwent cardinal changes when the time known as the Permian period arrived. At that moment, temperature began to drop, and the world, once filled with moist, tropical forests and giant ferns up to 30 meters tall, began to change. Imagine, due to a 30% decrease in atmospheric carbon dioxide levels, plants could no longer survive in their usual conditions. This created conditions for the emergence of new ecosystems, where instead of familiar green forests, more arid landscapes began to grow. And here's where it gets really extraordinary. In place of the giant tree ferns came coniferous trees that could adapt to the new conditions. Know what's most shocking? These coniferous trees could grow up to 40 meters tall, providing homes for new animal species that began to inhabit the changed landscape. But this is just the tip of the iceberg. With the planet's temperature dropping, glaciers began to gradually expand, and sea levels fell by several dozen meters, opening up new territories for life. On these new lands, the first reptiles began to appear, capable of surviving in harsher conditions. Many of these creatures possessed unique adaptations, such as the ability to live without water for many months. Now, imagine the impact on the ecosystem. Species that previously dominated began to disappear, while new predators like the wild ancestors of crocodiles began to hunt their competitors. And the most incredible part? This was just the prelude to what would happen later. As a result of these climatic changes, conditions were created that would eventually lead to the greatest mass extinction in Earth's history, known as the Permian-Triassic extinction, during which more than 95% of all species would disappear. The gradual cooling and desiccation of the planet's climate led to catastrophic changes in ecosystems that were once teeming with life. The temperature on Earth's surface began to drop, and this change was felt everywhere. Forests that were once lush and green began to thin out, leaving behind expanses similar to modern steppes. At this time, the level of carbon dioxide fell to 30%, creating conditions where plants could not obtain the necessary amount of carbon for photosynthesis. This led to the decline of flora that had previously dominated the planet, with more adapted species taking their place. In some regions where humidity had previously been 90%, dry and hot conditions emerged, fostering the spread of deserts. Around bodies of water that were once teeming with life, cracked earth appeared, and many rivers began to dry up. But this was not the most peculiar thing. As a result of these changes, some animal species, including large reptiles, began to adapt to life in conditions where water became scarce. How did they survive in such conditions? The secret lay in their ability to migrate and find new sources of water. For example, some types of theropods, which had previously hunted large herbivores, began to travel long distances in search of food, and this became a key factor in their survival. But this was not all. With the reduction in vegetation, the behavior of herbivores also changed. They began to form herds to protect themselves from predators and jointly search for food. Imagine how they had to adapt in conditions of resource scarcity to avoid becoming prey to hunger. This affected the entire food chain. Predators, deprived of their usual prey, began to hunt less familiar animals, which also changed their behavior. As a result of these changes, there was constant tension in the ecosystem. Some species survived, while others were rapidly disappearing. The most shocking thing? As a result of this cooling and desiccation of the climate on the planet, conditions emerged that favored the formation of new ecosystems where survival depended on the ability to quickly adapt to changing conditions. Widespread climate changes that occurred during that period led to catastrophic consequences for the flora that once dominated the planet. Imagine that the forests of the past were not just green, but true giants, trees reaching up to 40 meters in height with trunks as wide as a minivan. These plants, such as Lepidodendron and Sigillaria, were not just tall, their leaves could reach the size of a human. However, a sudden change in temperature and a decrease in atmospheric carbon dioxide levels caused these giants to disappear. While the tropics remained in eternal summer, other regions began to develop harsher conditions, making it difficult for plants to survive. But here's the thing, it was at this moment that other species emerged capable of adapting to the new realities. For instance, small but hardy plants like mosses and ferns began to fill the void left by the giants. What's even more astonishing, these new species could survive in conditions where the oxygen level dropped to 21%, significantly lower than in previous epochs when it reached 35%. Forest ecosystems began to change, and this was not just evolution, it was a true natural experiment where survival depended on the ability to adapt to rapidly changing conditions. But that's not all. Due to competition for resources, some species began to develop unusual strategies to survive. For example, some plants started to produce toxic substances to repel herbivores, while others developed deeper root systems to reach water. This created a completely new biodiversity that formed the basis for future ecosystems. And what's even more incredible, these changes in flora were harbingers of even more global changes that were on the horizon, poised to reshape the face of our planet. Giant horsetails and ferns, once dominant in ecosystems, began to disappear due to a factor that is hard to ignore: rapid climate change. Imagine a world where temperatures began to fluctuate sharply. Average temperatures rose by 8 degrees Celsius, and the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere reached 450 parts per million. This created intolerable conditions for the giant fern-like plants. But this is just the tip of the iceberg. Climate changes led to massive forest fires that covered vast areas, destroying entire forests where these plants once thrived. As a result, ecosystems began to transform, giving way to more resilient species. What is even more shocking, these changes coincided with significant volcanic activity that released enormous amounts of ash and gases, creating acid rain. This further worsened the conditions for the survival of horsetails. Additionally, the emergence of new animal species, such as trilobites and dinosaurs, put additional pressure on vegetation. These mammals, which began to hunt young shoots, also contributed to the reduction in the number of plants. How could this happen? It was a result of a complex network of interactions within the ecosystem, where each new change led to a chain reaction. By the end of this period, the areas once occupied by giant horsetails had significantly decreased, leaving only small remnants that managed to survive in the new conditions. Imagine how, over millions of years, these plants gradually gave way to more adapted species, such as flowering plants, which could effectively use sunlight and water. And once again, nature demonstrated its ability to adapt, leaving behind shadows of past glory and giving rise to new ecosystems that shaped the Earth's appearance for millions of years to come. At this moment, when old species were disappearing, a completely new flora began to form on the planet, determining the future of ecosystems. But what is most astonishing? These changes in vegetation prepared the ground for the appearance of the first true forests, which later became home to countless new forms of life. Coniferous trees, the first true evergreens, began to occupy vast spaces on Earth, marking a true revolution in the plant world. Imagine them growing to heights of 30 meters, forming dense forests that shaded the land from the sun, and their needle-like leaves with tough bark allowing them to survive even the harshest conditions. These trees, such as Araucarias and Podocarpus, had an incredible resin reserve that protected them from pests and diseases, acting as a natural shield. But that's not the most astonishing part. Their seeds were so microscopic that they could be easily carried by the wind over long distances, colonizing new territories. What's even more surprising, these coniferous trees began actively interacting with ecosystems, creating new conditions for the life of numerous organisms. For instance, some insects, like ancient beetles and bees, began to specialize in pollinating coniferous trees, leading to remarkable evolution. While some species adapted to life in their dense canopies, others found shelter and food in the understory. These forests became true oases for fauna, providing refuge for reptiles and mammals that hunted defenseless insects. But the most incredible thing is that coniferous trees began to form soil, making it more fertile with their fallen needles that decomposed and created ideal conditions for the growth of other plants. Scientific research shows that such changes in ecosystems led to the formation of new biomes that expanded and developed over millions of years. With each passing year, coniferous forests became more diverse, adding new species that could adapt to these unique conditions. And just when you think you know everything about coniferous trees, another astonishing fact emerges. Some of these trees could live up to 3,000 years, making them true witnesses to climate changes and ecosystem transformations over centuries. Seed plants became true heroes of their time as the climate became increasingly dry and harsh. Their evolution was remarkable. Seeds allowed them to survive unfavorable conditions, preserving genetic information in a state of dormancy. Imagine a tiny seed that could sleep for decades, waiting for rain. This is not just fantasy, but reality for many plants of that era. A seed could survive conditions where most other forms of life perished. For instance, seeds of ancient conifers like pines and spruces could maintain their viability for up to 7 years, giving them a significant advantage in the struggle for existence. In conditions where humidity dropped to 30%, such adaptations turned seed plants into true survivors. But what is truly astonishing is that they developed special structures like cones, which protected the seeds from unfavorable conditions. These cones only opened when conditions became ideal for germination. And what is even more astonishing, some of these plants, like ancient conifers, used resins in their seeds to protect them from pests and diseases, making them resistant to numerous threats. As a result, seed plants not only survived but also began to dominate ecosystems, displacing more primitive spore-bearing plants. They became the foundation for entire forest masses that covered areas comparable in size to modern countries. And this was just the beginning. Thanks to their seeds and adaptations, they created conditions for the emergence of new ecosystems and brought diversity that we can only dream of. But the most incredible thing is that some of these ancient seeds found the strength to germinate after millions of years, once they were discovered by archaeologists. Imagine seeds that have survived time and space returning to life under the modern sun. It's simply unimaginable. The decrease in oxygen levels became a true catastrophe for the giant insects that once dominated the Earth. Oxygen, which made up 35% of the atmosphere, allowed dragonflies to grow to a wingspan of 75 centimeters, more than some modern birds. But as the oxygen level dropped to 21%, the blood circulation system of insects, unable to adapt to the new conditions, was put at risk. How could this happen? The reason is that insects breathe through tracheae, and their size directly depends on the available oxygen. When the oxygen level fell, many of them became too small to effectively obtain oxygen and survive. It's strange, but this change led to the disappearance of many species that were once true giants of their time. Now imagine these tiny creatures, the size of an ant or even smaller, filling the voids left by their larger relatives on Earth. But that's not all. The smaller the insects became, the more diverse they became. During this period, new groups like bees and flies emerged, adapting to the existing conditions. What's even more astonishing, some species became so small that they could adapt to living in the most unexpected places, including the cracks in tree bark and even under stones. This gave them incredible advantages in the struggle for survival. And here's another interesting fact. During this time, the first flowering plants began to appear on Earth, creating new ecosystems and opening doors for insects with completely new abilities. These changes in the environment not only altered the sizes and forms of insects, but also their ways of interacting with plants. Isn't it amazing? Finding themselves in a new environment, they began to develop symbiotic relationships with flowering plants, which influenced the evolution of both insects and plants. Now imagine these tiny, full-of-life creatures starting to change the world around them, and this is just the beginning. Therapsids, which were the ancestors of modern mammals, were true evolutionary stars of their time. These creatures possessed unique features that set them apart from reptiles, such as more complex jaw structures that allowed them to efficiently chew food. For instance, their teeth were divided into incisors, canines, and molars, enabling them to adapt to diverse diets. What's even more astonishing, one of the most famous therapsids, Gryphodon, could reach lengths of up to 2 meters and had powerful jaws capable of tearing through tough vegetation. But that's just the beginning. These creatures began to develop warm-bloodedness, which allowed them to survive in various climatic conditions. Imagine the changes happening within their bodies. Internal organs adapted to different temperatures, enabling them to inhabit both cold and warm regions. Their skin was covered in hard scales for protection from predators, and some species even had fur resembling modern fur coats. This protective covering helped them retain heat and defend against external factors. But wait, there's more. Some therapsids, like Dicynodonts, had unique adaptations. Their skulls were wide, allowing for the development of large, powerful jaws for eating tough vegetation. These creatures could weigh up to 400 kilograms, making them some of the largest terrestrial animals of their time. Their presence in ecosystems was significant. They occupied the niche of herbivores, allowing ecosystems to thrive. Now imagine them existing in conditions where the climate was changing and competition for resources was increasing. This benefited their evolution. Therapsids began to develop various forms of behavior and social structures, allowing them to form groups for protection against enemies. They not only survived but also flourished, creating conditions for the emergence of the first mammals. And here's where it gets really interesting. Some therapsids, like synapsids, became the basis for mammals that appeared later. But here's the most shocking part. These creatures were capable of reproduction, ensuring the continuation of their species even in changing environmental conditions. Therapsids were not only the ancestors of mammals, but also true evolutionary experiments that demonstrated how life can adapt and change under the pressure of the environment. And you won't believe this, their traces can still be found in modern mammals. Their genes are still present in our DNA. Gorgonops were true predators of their time. Their length could reach 2 meters, and the presence of saber-toothed fangs up to 30 centimeters long made them formidable hunters. These creatures existed in an ecosystem filled with diverse forms of life, from large tree-like ferns to small reptiles, and their aggressive hunting style allowed them to dominate the food chain. But did you know that Gorgonops were not only predators but also ancestors of mammals? Their skulls had a complex structure that allowed them to better perceive sounds and smells, which was critically important for survival. Imagine these animals hunting in dense forests filled with sounds and movements. Their sharp teeth and powerful jaws easily tore through the flesh of their prey, while their furry skin provided protection from other predators. But that's not all. Gorgonops could reach speeds up to 30 kilometers per hour, allowing them to successfully pursue prey that was sometimes twice as fast. And here's where it gets really crazy. Some species, like the Gigantophis, had a jaw width that could rival the size of modern lions. Did you know that in some ecosystems, Gorgonops became the main competitors for other predators, such as the ancestors of crocodiles? This created a real struggle for survival, where the strongest survived. And now imagine that Gorgonops went extinct not due to predation, but due to climate change and mass extinctions that occurred later. This means they had to adapt to increasingly changing conditions to preserve their species. And the craziest part? Their remains, including teeth and jaws, are found not only in Africa but also in Antarctic regions, indicating how widely they were distributed across the planet. The appearance of the first herbivorous reptiles, the parasaurs, was a true revolution in the world of ancient animals. Imagine these creatures, the size of a small car, with a powerful body and thick skin resembling armor. They could reach lengths of 3 meters and weigh over 100 kilograms. These reptiles not only survived but also dominated ecosystems, feeding on leaves and bark from trees. What's remarkable is that their teeth were not sharp like predators' teeth but flat, perfectly suited for chewing plant material. Parasaurs inhabited diverse environments, from humid tropical forests to arid plains, allowing them to successfully adapt to changes in their surroundings. How did they manage to survive such conditions? The secret lay in their ability to store water in their bodies, enabling them to endure even the driest periods. Now consider that parasaurs were the ancestors of more famous dinosaurs like Triceratops and Stegosaurus. Their strong legs allowed them to move with remarkable ease and reach speeds of up to 15 kilometers per hour. But that's not the most extraordinary thing. Scientists discovered that their skin could change color depending on the temperature of the surrounding environment, helping them regulate heat exchange. These unique adaptations made parasaurs true masters of survival in the Permian period. And the most astonishing fact? Their remains have been found not only in Africa but also in Europe, proving just how widespread they were. While ice sheets were frozen on Earth, the supercontinent Pangaea was forming, its size comparable to the current continental mass, uniting almost all lands into a single gigantic mass. Imagine a territory covering more than 100 million square kilometers. It's as if all of Europe, Asia, and America were fused into one. The unification of continents led to a radical change in Earth's climate. On a vast area devoid of seas, extensive deserts emerged where temperatures could reach 60 degrees Celsius. The interior regions of Pangaea faced a lack of moisture, creating landscapes that can be compared to today's Sahara or Gobi. But that's not the most extraordinary thing. The oceans surrounding this giant began to change their nature. The waters became more salty, fostering unique ecosystems that could survive in extreme conditions. What's even more astonishing? Along the shores of Pangaea, giant coral reefs developed, which was completely atypical for such large continents, and some of them reached sizes comparable to modern states. At the same time, due to the immense size of Pangaea, fresh air could not circulate evenly, leading to the formation of intense hurricanes and storms that could uproot trees the size of small buildings. If you thought that was amazing, wait. The arrangement of the continents also affected existing ecosystems. Many animals and plants that could previously migrate between continents were isolated, which contributed to their evolution and the emergence of exotic forms of life. This led to the fact that unique species, such as dinosaurs, began to evolve in completely different directions. And here begins the truly bizarre. The unification of continents not only facilitated the emergence of new forms of life, but also created conditions for catastrophic events. At the junctions of tectonic plates, powerful earthquakes occurred, sometimes causing tsunamis that could destroy entire ecosystems. It's interesting that such catastrophes helped shape existing mountain ranges, such as the Urals, which arose due to shifts in the Earth's crust. And finally, it is known that the climatic changes caused by the formation of Pangaea were one of the factors contributing to the disappearance of many species at the end of the Permian period. But the most astonishing, approximately 90% of all animal and plant species disappeared as a result of this climate change, making it the most massive mass extinction in the history of the planet. These events not only affected the biosphere, but also shaped our modern understanding of ecosystems and their interconnections. In the heart of the supercontinent Pangaea, vast internal continental deserts formed, stretching for thousands of kilometers. Known as Permian deserts, they were larger in area than modern deserts like the Sahara. Imagine a landscape where sand and gravel covered an area equivalent to several countries combined. Even in the harsh climate, where temperatures could reach 50 degrees Celsius, life found ways to adapt. Remarkably, some plant species evolved to store water like cacti and survive in such conditions. A unique flora, including ancient conifers, occupied vast territories, providing oxygen at levels of 35%, which is twice the modern level. Did you know that it was during this time that the first true arid climatic conditions emerged, leading to significant changes in ecosystems? These deserts were not just barren, they were home to extraordinary creatures. Mammals like dinocephalians, up to 3 meters long, roamed these lands, adapting to conditions where water was scarce. And here's the most fascinating part. In these survival conditions, insects could reach sizes that seem impossible today. For example, some dragonfly species had wingspans of up to 75 centimeters. Imagine them soaring over endless sand dunes. But that's not all. These deserts played a pivotal role in shaping the climate that later became the basis for other ecosystems. Due to their scale, they created unique meteorological conditions that influenced the atmosphere of the entire planet. And here's where it gets really intriguing. In these deserts, archaeologists find fossils that show how life, as we know it, could have been entirely different if not for these harsh conditions. Ancient rivers that once flowed through the deserts left traces that scientists are still trying to decipher. These rivers not only shaped the landscape but also served as homes for various animal and plant species that seemed unable to survive in such harsh conditions. But there's more. Research shows that it was in these deserts that conditions emerged that later contributed to the development of life on Earth. Comparing climate and flora data reveals how the deserts of Pangaea became a key element in the history of our planet, influencing the evolution and adaptation of various species. And the most incredible part, scientific research shows that even after the disappearance of Pangaea, many species that evolved in these deserts continue to exist to this day. Geographical changes that occurred during the Permian period served as a true catalyst for the evolution of life on Earth. Imagine continents gradually shifting, with vast oceans separating mammals and reptiles, creating unique ecosystems. At this time, the heights of mountain ranges reached 30 kilometers, creating new climatic zones with diverse living conditions. For instance, the formation of the supercontinent Pangaea resulted in land occupying more than 70% of the planet's surface, leading to significant changes in the distribution of species. Did you know that on this vast territory the climate ranged from scorching deserts to humid tropics? This contrast in habitat conditions gave rise to a multitude of new species. For example, on the southern outskirts of Pangaea, the first conifers began to develop, growing up to 30 meters tall, creating dense forests teeming with life. Meanwhile, in conditions of high temperatures and increased humidity, the first reptiles emerged, beginning to dominate ecosystems. These creatures, such as the ancestors of dinosaurs, were able to adapt to diverse conditions, and their sizes were astonishing. Some reached lengths of 30 meters. But that's not the most peculiar part. The diversity of life reached its peak. In this period, the ancestors of mammals first appeared, capable of surviving in the most varied conditions. Imagine amphibians the size of crocodiles conquering new ecosystems. And what about marine life? In the oceans, Giant ammonites with shells up to a diameter of 1.5 meters swam, hunting other marine creatures. But what's truly astonishing is that despite all these changes, life at the end of the Permian period faced one of the most massive extinctions in Earth's history. The destruction of nearly 95% of all species was caused by sudden climate changes and volcanic activity. This extinction opened new opportunities for those few species that managed to survive. And the most incredible part, in the aftermath of this cataclysm, only the organisms that could adapt to the new conditions remained, and it was these that formed the basis for a new wave of evolutionary development. At this time, the planet was facing catastrophic changes that completely reshaped the ecosystem. The level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere reached unprecedented levels, around 350 parts per million, which is twice the current levels. This led to global warming, where temperatures rose to 40 degrees Celsius in some regions, and sea levels fluctuated, flooding significant land areas. As a result, vast marine ecosystems began to collapse. Coral reefs, which were home to millions of species, started to disappear and were replaced by less diverse organisms. If you ever wondered what Earth would look like without this diversity, imagine lifeless bodies of water filled only with single-celled organisms. But this is not the most bizarre part. With the increase in temperature on land, massive forest fires began, destroying entire forest areas and creating smoke clouds that covered the sky and reduced the amount of sunlight reaching the surface. These changes triggered sharp fluctuations in ecosystems, where previously dominant species began to die out due to changes in their habitat. Around 90% of marine species and more than 75% of terrestrial organisms disappeared during this critical period. And here is where things get truly surreal. In the conditions of a severe oxygen deficit, which dropped to 21%, only those organisms that could adapt to extreme conditions survived. For instance, some bacteria developed the ability to use hydrogen sulfide for respiration, marking a new stage in the biochemistry of life on Earth. What's even more shocking? These bacteria became the foundation for new ecosystems that could exist in conditions where life seemed impossible. An example of such adapted organisms are so-called thermophilic bacteria that inhabited hot springs capable of withstanding temperatures up to 120 degrees Celsius, giving an idea of how diverse life can be even in the most extreme conditions. The Siberian Traps represent one of the most colossal volcanic eruptions in Earth's history, covering an area comparable in size to the entire modern Europe. These lava flows, which occurred around 250 million years ago, formed layers of basaltic rocks up to 1.5 kilometers thick. Imagine the thunderous roar of the skies as volcanoes spewed lava and gas in quantities sufficient to cover millions of square kilometers. The volcanic activity was so intense that carbon dioxide and sulfur gases released into the atmosphere altered the planet's climate, creating greenhouse conditions where temperatures could rise by 10 degrees Celsius. But that's not the most astonishing part. Research indicates that these eruptions could have led to mass extinctions, with around 97% of all life forms disappearing. What's even more remarkable, a team of scientists studying the remains of these volcanic events found that the lava flows contained traces of rare metals like platinum and gold, formed as a result of magma interacting with the Earth's crust. One of the largest lava fields, known as the Urengoy Traps, covers an area of 30,000 square kilometers and has a depth of up to 100 meters. This means that beneath our feet lies a whole world full of mysteries and secrets waiting to be discovered. Meanwhile, geologists estimate that such catastrophic eruptions could have occurred every few million years, challenging our notions of the Earth's stability. What kind of living beings could have survived in such hellish conditions? Studies show that some organisms, such as thermophilic bacteria, could adapt to such extreme conditions. These bacteria can survive temperatures up to 120 degrees Celsius and are evidence that life on Earth can thrive even in the most unfavorable conditions. But that's not all. Volcanic activity led to the formation of sulfuric acid clouds in the atmosphere, causing acid rain and altering soil composition. This forced many ecosystems to adapt or go extinct. Ultimately, the Siberian traps not only transformed the landscape but also created conditions for the evolution of new life forms that populated the planet millions of years later. And the most astonishing thing? These volcanic eruptions could have been harbingers of even more significant changes that affected life on Earth in the future. The Permian Triassic extinction event was a true catastrophe for life on Earth, wiping out around 95% of all species. The causes of this global event are still debated, but the shocking fact is that massive volcanic eruptions that occurred in the territory of modern Siberia played a key role. These eruptions formed what are known as the Siberian traps, releasing trillions of tons of carbon dioxide and sulfur into the atmosphere, which led to rapid climate changes. Imagine the temperature on the planet rose by 10 degrees Celsius in just a few decades. This caused the oceans to heat up and the level of oxygen in them to significantly decrease. But that's not all. When carbon dioxide dissolved in water, it turned into carbonic acid, causing massive ocean acidification and decimating marine life. What's most shocking is that these changes happened so quickly that many species couldn't adapt in time, and entire ecosystems disappeared. On land, chaos reigned, forests were dying out, and the flora and fauna that survived the volcanic activity were on the brink of extinction. The mechanism of this extinction was so complex that it involved not only volcanic eruptions, but also changes in sea levels, which caused fluctuations in ecosystems. Many species, including ammonites and trilobites, had no chance of survival. What's even more surprising is that this extinction opened the way for new developments. It was after this event that dinosaurs began to dominate. And what's even more shocking, after this cataclysm, new species appeared on Earth that previously had no chance of survival thanks to sudden changes in ecosystems. Just imagine how life on the planet changed when some species disappeared and others, seemingly doomed, became dominant. Volcanic eruptions lasted for millions of years, and their influence was felt even millions of years later when nature began to recover. After this event, not only new species but also completely new ecosystems appeared on Earth, which adapted to the changed conditions. And now the craziest part, due to these catastrophic changes, life on the planet was completely reorganized and never returned to what it was before. Did you know what happened when one of the most massive catastrophes in history occurred on Earth? 96% of marine species and 70% of terrestrial vertebrates disappeared over the course of just a few thousand years. These aren't just numbers, they represent entire ecosystems that collapsed like a house of cards. At that time, the oceans were teeming with incredible creatures like belemnites and trilobites, but their fate was sealed. It all began with a catastrophic wave of volcanic activity when enormous volumes of carbon dioxide were released from the Earth's interior, leading to global warming. The temperature of the oceans rose by several degrees, causing massive changes in the chemical composition of the water. Now imagine this. Oxygen, essential for life, began to plummet sharply. How could this have happened? High temperatures fostered the growth of toxic algae, which displaced beneficial organisms. And here's where it gets really bizarre. As a result of this algal bloom, marine life was on the brink of extinction. In a short period, dead zones formed in the oceans, areas where the oxygen level was so low that no creatures could survive. But that's not the strangest part. On land, chaos reigned as well. While the oceans sank into darkness, terrestrial ecosystems faced their own catastrophes. Multi-layered forests filled with lizards and ancient mammals began to die out, and each day seemed to turn the dazzling world grey and lifeless. How could such diverse species disappear so quickly? It turned out that climate change acted as a catalyst for mass extinction. Plants couldn't adapt, and food chains collapsed. And at some point, life on the planet was on the brink of extinction. What's even more shocking, Scientists believe that one possible explanation for this extinction is the collision of Earth with an asteroid, which led to even more carbon dioxide and dust being released into the atmosphere. But that's just the beginning, because even more extraordinary changes in life on Earth followed. Imagine oceans where only dead zones exist, areas where the oxygen level is so low that animals cannot survive. These dead zones cover an area comparable in size to the United Kingdom. In recent decades, scientists have discovered that such areas are becoming more prevalent, and this is not just a coincidence. Millions of years ago, during the Permian-Triassic extinction event, similar conditions existed. At that time, the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere rose to 600 parts per million, leading to a phenomenon known as acid rain. This rain eroded the earth, making it inhospitable for plants and thus for animals that depended on them. What is even more shocking? In some regions, the pH of the ocean dropped to a value close to 5, similar to lemon juice, which simply destroys marine ecosystems. As a result of this process, approximately 95% of all marine species, including giant ammonites and even the ancestors of modern sharks, went extinct. How could such changes occur? The secret lay in the fact that volcanic activity released enormous amounts of sulfur and carbon, polluting the atmosphere and oceans. Consider this. Entire ecosystems that had existed for millions of years were wiped off the face of the Earth in just a few decades. But this is not all. Scientists found that some species that managed to survive evolved into completely new forms. For example, small crustaceans adapted to low oxygen levels, becoming more resistant to toxic conditions. The secret to their survival was unique physiological changes that allowed them to breathe even in the most unfavorable conditions. And here is where it gets really strange. Some of these creatures became the basis for new fauna that filled the oceans in subsequent epochs. There are even data suggesting that it was during this time that the first true fish species appeared, beginning to fill the void left by the extinct. Isn't that amazing? So, after such a global catastrophe, life still found a way to regenerate. But how exactly did this happen? The continuation of this story makes us think about how, even after the most terrible catastrophes, nature always finds a way to restore itself. But what specific mechanisms helped this process? The composition of the atmosphere changed dramatically when one of the most catastrophic events in Earth's history occurred. Imagine that the level of carbon dioxide skyrocketed to 80%, turning the planet into something akin to a greenhouse oven. This change happened due to volcanic activity that released massive amounts of gas, blocking out sunlight and creating conditions where life could only exist in a narrow range. Oxygen, essential for the survival of many species, dropped to levels below 10%. Can you imagine the impact on ecosystems? Giant amphibians and reptiles that dominated at the time began to experience oxygen deprivation, leading to mass extinctions. But that's not all. Along with carbon dioxide, toxic gases like methane and sulfur dioxide entered the atmosphere, creating a true poisonous environment. While terrestrial organisms struggled for survival, the oceans became acidic, killing marine creatures such as corals and mollusks. The secret to the survival of some species lay in their ability to adapt to these extreme conditions. Some fish developed special mechanisms to filter oxygen from water. But even this did not save most species, and around 97% of all marine organisms disappeared. With each passing day, this catastrophe worsened, and the first signs of recovery began to appear on the horizon. But how could life begin to fill the void left by the extinct species? Each new day brought new mysteries, and nature, as always, prepared its own surprises. Do you know what happened millions of years after this cataclysm? The recovery of ecosystems began with the simplest forms of life that could thrive in these harsh conditions. After the catastrophe that led to the extinction of 95% of Earth's species, life began to slowly but surely recover. Remarkably, it was during this time that the ancestors of modern mammals and dinosaurs appeared. These creatures, known as archosaurs, were small reptiles that managed to adapt to the new conditions. What is fascinating about them? Their size did not exceed that of a modern sparrow, but they possessed unique adaptations that allowed them to survive in the changed world. Among them were species with long legs, which gave them an advantage in speed and maneuverability. These were true pioneers who began to fill the ecological niches left vacant by the extinction. But that's not all. Some of these creatures developed thermoregulation, allowing them to survive in colder conditions, which was rare for their ancestors. The wide variety of forms and sizes helped them colonize various ecosystems, from forests to open plains. And here's where it gets really incredible. Some of them began to develop hair, leading to the appearance of the first mammals. One of the earliest known forms of mammals, known as the mammal with teeth, was the size of a mouse and had teeth adapted to different types of food. These small creatures began to hunt insects, which became the basis of their diet. What is even more astonishing, they were active at night, which allowed them to avoid predators and competition with larger reptiles. Moreover, this gave them the opportunity to develop their senses, such as smell and hearing, which was a significant step in evolution. At this time, Earth was not only inhabited by reptiles, but also by amphibians. Some of them reached the size of a small dog, and their ability to adapt allowed them to survive both on land and in water. But that's not all. It was during this period that the first mammals with live birth began to form, which fundamentally changed the way they reproduced. And what is even more incredible, the first mammals began to develop social structures, paving the way for more complex behavior that we see in modern species. Their offspring, protected from external threats, became the basis for future evolutionary leaps. All this was happening against the backdrop of the Earth's atmosphere gradually changing, becoming enriched with oxygen, which created conditions for the active growth of plants, and in turn, an increase in food resources. Thus, on the planet, new ecosystems began to appear, which eventually led to the emergence of the most diverse groups of animals. The Permian-Triassic extinction event was a truly catastrophic occurrence, wiping out nearly 97% of all marine and 75% of all terrestrial species. What is truly astonishing is that this mass extinction not only destroyed life, but also opened up ecological niches waiting for new inhabitants. After this cataclysm, ecosystems began to rapidly change, providing opportunities for the emergence of new animal groups. On the ruins of the Old World, where ammonites and trilobites dominated, entirely new forms of life began to develop. The most intriguing aspect is that it was during this time that the first dinosaurs appeared, which would later become the planet's main predators. These early dinosaurs, such as Archaeopteryx, could reach lengths of up to 1 meter and possessed feathers that may have been used for thermoregulation or even early attempts at flight. But that's not the most peculiar part. At this time, the ancestors of modern marine reptiles, such as ichthyosaurs, began to thrive in the waters. These creatures could reach lengths of up to 10 meters and had streamlined bodies that allowed them to hunt fast prey. Imagine them darting around much like modern dolphins, but in a world without humans. No less remarkable are the terrestrial mammals that began to fill the niches left by the extinct species. Their ancestors, resembling lizards, developed new adaptations to survive in environments previously dominated by large reptiles. What's even more astonishing, these mammals began to evolve into diverse forms that would eventually lead to the appearance of early mammals like Basilosaurus, which could exceed 30 meters in length. Their massive bodies and adaptations to marine life make them not only interesting, but also enigmatic. Now imagine their descendants in the future having the ability to venture onto land and reshape the entire planet. It's fascinating to think about what other mysteries this time period holds, when the world was recovering from the catastrophe. During the Permian-Triassic extinction event, a catastrophe occurred that wiped out 95% of all species on Earth. This event opened the door for new forms of life, and it was during this time that reptiles began to dominate the planet. Imagine a world where the extinction shook ecosystems, leaving behind a void where life once thrived. In this vacuum, the reptiles that survived began to evolve at an incredible speed. Capable of surviving in diverse conditions, they adapted to new ecological niches, leading to their rapid growth. Did you know that in just 30 million years, reptiles became as diverse as modern mammals? This was an exciting time when some ichthyosaurs grew to the size of modern dolphins, while others, like Archaeopteryx, were beginning to develop feathers, heralding the arrival of birds. But the most amazing thing is that reptiles not only took the place of predators, but also began to develop social structures that can be compared to modern flocks. What do you think facilitated such rapid development? The secret lay in the reptiles' ability to regulate their body temperature, allowing them to survive in various climatic conditions, from scorching deserts to humid tropics. Many species, such as dinosaurs, began to hunt in packs, creating effective survival strategies that are astonishing. And what's even more astonishing, during this period, the first mammals appeared, which, as it is believed, were less noticeable and played a minor role in ecosystems. But it was in this struggle for survival that evolution began, leading to the emergence of modern mammals. And perhaps the most fascinating chapters of history are yet to come. Reptiles began to conquer new territories, including aquatic and aerial spaces, making them dominant creatures on the planet. Hundreds of millions of years ago, in conditions where life was just beginning to recover, it was this struggle for existence and adaptation that laid the foundation for the future ecosystems we know today. Remarkably, during the Triassic period, there were also giant marine reptiles like plesiosaurs, which could reach lengths of up to 30 meters. The first archosaur that appeared on Earth was a true predecessor of future dinosaurs. These reptiles, which also included the ancestors of modern crocodiles and birds, dominated the planet due to their remarkable adaptability. Imagine that archosaurs could grow up to 8 meters in length and had powerful jaws capable of tearing the flesh of their prey. Their anatomy was unique. They had long necks and light limbs, allowing them to move quickly on land. If you thought that was impressive, know that some of them had characteristic serrated teeth that helped them hunt other animals, making them a terror for all small creatures of the time. But that's not the most astonishing thing. Archosaurs not only hunted, but also developed social structures similar to those seen in modern mammals. Their behavior often resembled hunting packs where each group member played a role. While some hunted, others protected the territory from competitors. But there's more. They had high speeds, reaching up to 30 kilometers per hour, allowing them to escape predators and find food. Archosaurs evolved in changing climates, which led to the emergence of various species, each with its unique features. For example, some archosaurs developed long legs, allowing them to move quickly across open spaces, while others remained in forests, crawling on trees in search of food. Their diversity was truly captivating, from light and fast to massive and powerful. Archosaurs, like modern lizards, could change color, helping them hide from predators. But that's not all. Some of them had a body shape resembling modern waterfowl and could spend time both on land and in water. Their ability to adapt to various habitats was key to their survival. Ultimately, archosaurs became the foundation for future dinosaurs, which later dominated the world. For instance, one of the most famous archosaurs, the Sinosauropteryx, was 2 meters long and became the ancestor of many large predators, such as the Tyrannosaurus. Thus, it can be said that these reptiles not only preceded dinosaurs, but also laid the foundation for the ecosystems we know today. And did you know that some archosaurs were able to make sounds to communicate with each other, which was one of the reasons for their successful evolution? Empty ecosystems left behind after the Permian-Triassic extinction began to recover, and this was truly astonishing. Some of the first inhabitants of these new conditions became the predecessors of modern mammals. Did you know that the sizes of the earliest Triassic animals were sometimes smaller than those of modern mice? For instance, small lizards like melanosaurs did not exceed 10 centimeters in length and could hide in tree bark cracks. They survived due to their ability to quickly adapt to changing conditions and feed on the remnants of vegetation that was beginning to regrow. But this is not all. Reptiles emerged, dominating the new ecosystems, and among them were archosaurs. These creatures not only hunted small animals but also became prey for predators. During this time, many of them possessed remarkable adaptations. For example, some species could reach speeds of up to 30 kilometers per hour, allowing them to evade attacks. Now imagine this scene. On the backdrop of greening forests where each tree could reach a height of 30 meters, lizards crawled that could run across the ground like modern cheetahs. A crucial aspect of ecosystem recovery was the appearance of the first herbivores, such as protosaurs, which could reach lengths of 4 meters and fed on the vegetation that was filling the space again. These giants played a key role in shaping new ecosystems, as they essentially created conditions for other species that soon appeared. Did you know that thanks to their powerful jaws and teeth, they could eat tough leaves and bark? While some species were surviving, others, such as early dinosaurs, began to evolve, developing unique adaptations that allowed them to dominate the new ecosystems. If you thought this was amazing, wait for it. Some of these early dinosaurs could reach lengths of 10 meters and weigh up to 5 tons, placing them at the top of the food chain. And here is where it gets really crazy. Among these giants were those that could reproduce, reaching sizes of several meters. Yes, this meant they could reproduce like modern birds, laying eggs in nests they created in protected places. What is even more astonishing, some of these eggs could be the size of a rugby ball, allowing them to reproduce in conditions where competition was fierce. Remarkably, at this time, the first forest ecosystems also appeared, where trees reaching heights of 50 meters formed dense canopies. An era of giant plants and the first terrestrial ecosystems was a true laboratory for life on Earth, where it sought new forms and sizes. Dense forests composed of tree-like ferns and conifers up to 50 meters tall created unique conditions for harmonious coexistence. Imagine, these forests were home to giant insects whose sizes could rival those of modern birds. For instance, dragonflies had wingspans of 75 centimeters. Now imagine these enormous creatures soaring through the air, hunting small amphibians and other insects. But that's not all. It was during this period that the first terrestrial ecosystems emerged, where life on land began to flourish due to complex interactions between plants and animals. The unique soil structure formed by the decomposition of giant plants enriched it with nutrients, fostering the emergence of new species. And here's where it gets really fascinating. This ecological dynamic led to the appearance of the first reptiles, which would later become the ancestors of dinosaurs. But this was not an easy path. When the Permian-Triassic catastrophe struck, an ecological catastrophe wiped out nearly 90% of all species on the planet. But here's what's most shocking. This mass extinction opened up new opportunities for evolution, allowing fast and adaptable reptiles to fill the vacant niches and diversify in the most varied directions. Without this cataclysm, dinosaurs, which dominated Earth during the Triassic period, might never have appeared. Thus, life on the planet was ready for a new stage where sizes and forms of existence became even more diverse and extreme.